Welcome to Women in Entertainment's In Her Words podcast. I'm Renee Rossi.
And I'm Gretchen McCourt.
And we're the co-founders of Women in Entertainment. Today we're talking to Emily Fox.
Emily is a showrunner and executive producer for some of the biggest shows on television and streaming services. We think that you're going to really enjoy this episode, learning Emily's journey and how she comes up with such fun content like Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce and Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. So we hope you enjoy. Emily, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're so excited to talk to you about so many things. A half hour is not going to be enough time.
I can talk really fast.
Okay, good. So first of all, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and Renee and I like to pretend that we watch a lot of content that she recommends, but actually it's very mutual. So Jane by Design, I just want you to know, first of all, I own it. I own it because that's how obsessed I am. So Kendall gave me questions today to know where is the next season. We have to have this story continue on. It's our favorite. We absolutely love that whole series. We love Jane. I mean, Andie MacDowell. Oh my God.
MacDowell.
But I want Jane to end up with Billy. Kendall wants Jane to end up with the nephew. I forgot his name. Andy's nephew who works at the. So we've got a lot of notes for you.
Okay, I think Jane was going to end up with neither of those options.
Okay,
she's
that hurts.
Well, she's 16. Think back to your 16-year-old the boyfriend from that. That's not how you end up with anywhere. We have some growing and changing to do, and our tastes might change. And
it was such a fun series, and just so
it was so bubbly, and fun, and
it was kind of a precursor though to like Emily in Paris and some of these that just the outfits and the fashion that she got to do, and that. Leaving reality behind, that the 16-year-old could be confused for a young adult and have a job in the city when she's really a high school student out in New Jersey. Is that where she was? Yeah.
She was like in Westchester.
Okay.
But yeah, it's the ultimate fantasy.
Yeah.
For a particular kind of, young person that like dreams of, who doesn't like, lie in bed at night and think about like what could be,
right,
and envisioning yourself in a world that's like, in your mind as a fairy tale. And of course, like a huge part of that was about like acknowledging and seeing the reality of what it is like to be in that world, and that it isn't all just, cute outfits and magazine shoots. There's a lot of work that goes into it.
No, it's a great YA series for young boys and girls, and we hope that as well as adults. I was like, am I watching it on my own when she's not around? Yes, I am.
I won't. I'll never tell.
But that's such an interesting world. I mean, you love that YA world. Will you tell us a little bit about? We really want to hear your journey, not just about your projects, but that is a favorite, so I had to get it in there. Okay. But your journey and how you came to that world and why. I mean, you excel and see and love it.
I think I feel like I have very vivid memories of being a teenager and being a young adult, and like it was such a formative time, and I think I kept a really careful record of my own experiences, my own hopes and dreams, my own like dashed hopes and dreams. It was like and again it's like it felt like a very a complete memory. And so there's so much for me personally to draw on, like from my own personal experience, but also like the experiences of my friends, which were also, so varied and complex. And, I grew up in Philadelphia in the 80s, like a lot happened. And social media makes it it makes it possible to remember all of that, reconnect with those people, reconnect with that time in your life, people finding old photo albums and posting pictures where you're like, oh my God, like that, and I always say, like, everyone's like, God, the fashion. And I'm like, listen, we were doing the right thing at the time.
Yeah, we were.
That was correct. that hair,
I was
the
about to say that
outfits.
hair. I was
Oh, the
like,
hair.
oof.
I
The
know. It's like I want to
Aquanet
go
my
back
sister
and
used for those bangs,
the bangs had to go straight up in the
straight
air.
up in the air.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the perms.
Right.
I
And
mean,
it didn't look strange to us
of
at
course
the
No.
not. No,
time.
no.
And
Looking
now,
back, it's like, I think back on like begging my mom for a perm,
Oh, yeah.
begging her. And she was like, no. I was like,
I wanted to get my hair feathered,
Oh.
and I was gently advised not to do that with my hair. And I tried to do it myself, with nail scissors. That went about as well as you might
I
expect.
was going to say,
Yeah,
that's a
but it was just,
recovery.
I think, but getting back to your original question, I think like it's, and I have a 15-year-old daughter, so I am sort of getting to relive it a little bit through this very different lens.
Yeah.
And it brings me great joy when I can work on something that she can relate to and where I can bring our experiences in. I also have a 12-year-old son, so I don't want to leave him out of it because he also is a big fan of a lot of the work that I do and watches my shows with me. And like, it's just so interesting to examine that time in life from a grounded perspective, staying away from stereotypes and staying away from those moments when you really feel like, oh, this character is being written by an adult,
Right.
as opposed to, oh, this character really sounds like a teenager and really is having teenager experiences, even in the case like Jane by Design, where it's like an extraordinary situation,
Uh-huh.
She's an ordinary girl
Right.
in
Right.
many ways. Woman, sorry. Young woman.
No, and I think that is, we see that. I've seen that through all your projects, and Watchful Eye just popped into my head also because whether it's the young woman, whether it's Kelly Bishop, who is so there's such um, a connection with them, and it doesn't matter if it's coming out of, I don't want to say how old Kelly, but I don't know how old, but an older woman or a younger, it's just such a real conversation happening. And I think there's no stereotypes there that, or you're very successful in avoiding those stereotypes. Like, this is what a young girl would say, this is what an older woman would say. And their conversation flows back and forth really, really amazingly real.
They were wonderful. I mean, Kelly Bishop's a national treasure.
Oh my gosh.
She is ageless. And
We're huge Gilmore Girl fans, so all of your little
who
pieces, I mean,
is
come
Who
on.
wasn't?
not. I know. I was very starstruck around her in a way that was.
It's like you think about her in Dirty Dancing. Like,
Right,
think of
right.
like she's been in so much. She has seen so much.
She was in the original cast of A Chorus Line.
No.
Was she really?
Oh, I didn't know
I
that.
didn't know that either.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I
Oh
mean,
my God.
you
And
can imagine getting really tongue-tied around someone like
Yes,
that.
Yeah.
Just
yes.
Like how am I sharing the same air with you? This is
Like,
I am not worthy.
Well, and just how fresh she is in this. I mean, even she had a little cameo in Maisel, I think, the last season, and just that too. I mean, she's as fresh as she was in Dirty Dancing, and
and,
it
and
doesn't.
in a chorus line, I guess.
Yeah, and a chorus line.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. She's such a pro. She's so prepared. But yeah, her rapport with with Elena, with
Uh-huh.
Marielle, who plays our main character, was instantaneous. And what we've always said about those two characters is, even though they are from such opposite walks of life, that game recognizes game, that they are both very good at reading other people and seeing sort of what's behind the silver curtain.
Yeah.
And it makes them really worthy adversaries. So it's really fun to watch the sparks fly between them, because they're not exactly enemies.
No, they're but yeah, I like
they
that.
are allies in a certain way.
Respectful of
Yes.
each other. Yeah.
Mhm.
When you're creating and working with your writers, how much of that is scripted and how much comes when you cast them? Like, how much of that is, I don't want to say impromptu, but is that rapport between them seems so natural.
I mean, it's gambling, right? Because when you're casting roles, you're casting them individually. You don't really have the luxury of, putting two people in a room and seeing how they are together. I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes you do if there's a romantic lead And there's going to be like a big love story you can do if time permits and everything else permits. You can do like a chemistry read to see if these two people have on camera chemistry. But that's usually reserved. The only times I've done that has been for a romantic story. It's not for like a friendship or you kind of trust the actors, but it's all a gamble. It's like, I think these two people will work well together. And in the case of Kelly Bishop, it's like, we know her body of work. It's,
Yeah.
I know what she can do. And she was already cast in the show when I came to the show, so I wasn't part of that process. But of course, I mean, she's perfection. And I think that was exactly what that character was meant to be, which is someone who has been raised in a certain kind of world and who wants to protect her own interests because no one else will.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's steely. And I think Kelly just brings that as part of who she is. But she also was able to layer so much on top of it beyond who just Kelly is. It's not just be yourself. It's, be this character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the show's getting, such great reviews, and we can't, it's amazing how just what everyone's thinking and how excited people are and waiting for the next episode to come out. So that has to be a lot of fun.
It is. I need to, the thing you're not supposed to do is go on Twitter or like Reddit and find people who are like asking questions or have like, whatever kind of snarky comments.
Right.
You're never supposed to go on Reddit.
You never go on Reddit. Naturally, the first thing I did was go on Reddit. And like people were like, "Oh, this show's really interesting. I wonder what this means, and I wonder what's going to happen with this." I was kind of like, "Hi, I'm the showrunner."
Did you do an AMA?
I didn't do like a formal AMA, but I just like went on like someone made a page, and I was like,
oh,
just if you guys have any questions.
Oh.
Like, I'm not going to reveal anything like huge, but just like, I'm here. I just want you to know I'm here.
That's amazing.
And
did they go crazy?
Crazy, which is so fun. Where they're like, wait, what? They're like, what are you doing on Reddit? And I was like, listen, I love Reddit. And like, I've always wanted to just be on Reddit and actually speak authoritatively on something instead of being the dummy who's like, who's the killer on Mayor of Easttown? Like it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
And I think like when you engage in a positive way, that's like, oh my God, I'm so happy you like the show. Do you have questions? Like,
that's awesome.
And that way, no one comes at you with hostility.
Right.
No one's going to be like, well, I hate the show, and if they do, I'll be like, do you want $10? Like, can I reimburse you for your time? It's terrible. Like, it's, but yeah, I think it's fun for, because you make a show, you're in such a bubble, you're only with, your cast and your crew and the network and the studio and the producers and all the people. And it's like, you're all sort of in this, it's like you're in a pinball machine and then suddenly it's out there.
Right.
And people are responding and having ideas and having theories. And it's like, it's just fun because that's the whole point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The objective is to
about it. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Something.
It's a place of vulnerability for you to go onto Reddit because it's the actual audience. It's not press. It's not reviewers.
You're not scripted of what they're going to ask and what they're going to say. I love that.
So that's incredibly vulnerable of you to do.
It's actually the thing that made me feel better. Like last week after the premiere, I was mostly under like a weighted blanket, like watching horror movies, and so it freaks you out. Like it's really hard to put something out there and know that like some people are going to come back with like, oh, this is so derivative, or this is really flat, or I don't really like it, or I watched it and I'll never get that time back, and whatever. And it's like that's going to happen,
of course.
Yeah.
But then kind of, going on Reddit and seeing someone be like, hey, this show's really good. I wonder if do you think it's this doorknob? And I'm like, it is not that doorknob, but I can't tell you that. But I love that you're thinking that.
Right.
It's just so
like,
cool to kind of see where everybody's imagination is
going.
Like,
and I'm like, some people are like
the trail in the creative process.
I know. And I'm like, I don't want you to guess everything right now.
do you find that when you like even just going on it for the last episode, do you find that affects your creative process? Like that you're like, oh, that's actually a really good idea.
I mean, a little, because the show is like, it's sort of done and dusted. So it's like I can't go back and change anything at this point.
But the next one.
Someone did say, like, I wonder if, I forget what it was that they suggested. Oh, they had seen something. There's a reference she makes to Elena mentioned something in episode 3 about Buñuel movie where like the thing with the eyeball.
Yeah.
And someone on Reddit was like, oh my God, the eyeball. It's eyes. Everything's about eyes. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that. Like I didn't realize. I was like, oh yeah, that is an eyeball reference. But I didn't, so it's like a little like, I want to make it seem like that was intentional. I'm like, yeah, that was, I totally did that
Play
on
it cool. Just play it cool.
purpose. Shh. But it's, I mean, I guess to the extent that it would affect my creative process, it's like, it's sort of hard to say because
of just the timing of it all.
Yeah, the timing of it all. But it does sort of give you real-time feedback from the people that the show is written for, and that's, and I do think it's interesting to see what they respond to, and which characters they like and which lines they think are funny or if they don't think it's funny at all. And I guess it's, it all goes into the mix of like, what is it that we're trying to do here in telling a story that has something to say about, life as we know it and the human condition, things like that.
Yeah, no, that's it is. It's brave of you to put it out there and to be to say who you are. You could have been just an anonymous person.
Yeah, I could have just been like a little white like blob with like a hat on. Yeah.
We when we were going through things and preparing today, we said that we kind of have 6 degrees of Emily Fox with women in entertainment because of people who have come in. So we worked with Paul. Paul's been done our summit before, and you guys worked together on Zoe, right?
Together in the sense that we both worked on the show. On
the show together.
But I did season 2 of Zoe's, and that was in sort of at height of pandemic. So we were in a Zoom writer's room. And we didn't go to the set, and we didn't, Austin Winsberg, who created the show, he went to the set, and one of the other writers, Zora Bikangaga, went to the set, but we were mostly here in LA. So that show was the least interactive I have experienced because it was,
Paul said it's one of his favorite projects of his whole career.
Oh, yeah, that's so nice.
Yeah, he would loved that.
I loved it too.
That project.
It was
a lot of fun.
Delight, and especially at that moment in time,
to
be able to go somewhere every day where it's like we're thinking about music, we're thinking about love, we're thinking about grief, and a lot of the themes in that show were pretty heavy, but it was counterbalanced with so much lightness and so much joy.
What a fun cast. Oh my gosh.
Cast is fantastic. And singing and dancing. It's like that's what we do to stave off,
everything.
Everything. Grief, sadness, fear,
anything.
And at that moment in time, I think Zoe's was sort of like, it was a great show on its own, but the timing was exquisite.
Yeah.
Because it helped bring a lot of people out of the doldrums.
Yeah, absolutely. We also, remind me what project you worked with Julie Dirk?
Julie Dirk wrote the pilot of Watchful Eye.
Oh, of Watchful Eye. Okay,
Yeah.
And we have had the Grace and Frankie, Frankie and Grace, how do they say it?
Grace and
Frankie.
Grace and Frankie.
The cast and the team, they've been at the summit before. Julie's been on a panel with us before.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah,
that's so great.
So there's just so many, the teams that you put together and that you get to work on. How many amazing projects they do with you, and how many projects do you have kind of your regulars that you like to work with? How do you mix and match your teams for these different projects?
That's a really interesting question, because I always say that putting together a writer's room is Moneyball, right? It's like you have to have people in the room who complement each other.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of people who are, in a hiring position struggle somewhat with the idea of creating a team, because I think there is this impulse to have kind of everyone be at the same level of productivity and experience. And, my view is always like, no, you need a a whole, you know, a mix of different strengths and different
Mhm.
life experiences, different points of view, different ages, different sexual orientation, different backgrounds. It's like everyone has something to bring. And I have, you do find yourself kind of picking up, people jump on the train as you're going, and I have worked with many people several times over, and when we were putting together the writers room for this show, it was like, oh well, I gotta get this guy, and
Yeah.
I gotta get this one and this one, and then but I loved also to meet new people and bring in especially young people who are starting out,
Yeah.
at the staff writer or story editor level. Like that's I get so much joy out of being able to be a mentor and a good guide to young writers, because
Mhm.
listen, I'm going to work for them someday. And this is a business that I think can be very brutal and can really chew you up. And I feel very protective of young writers, because I'm like, yeah, it can be awful, but
Yeah.
let's come work with me and this will be really fun. And then if you end up in an awful job next, you can call me and you can be like, this is awful. And I can say like, yeah, that's awful. Like, don't do that. Let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Right.
It's like, it's being a kind of a big sister.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But hopefully if they've established a foundation and they
Yeah.
feel confident in themselves as writers, then they can sort of move forward in their career and, feel like they've got their feet underneath them.
Did you have somebody who helped you on that as you were coming up? Like when you look at your history, what were your like, that was horrible, but I pushed through it. Did you have those like kind of pivotal moments that you're trying to almost protect kind of the upcoming creatives from, that you had to go through?
Yes, certainly. I mean, every show is its own, like, its own, opera of insanity. And certainly I have taken lessons from every show, from people on different shows. There's certainly plenty of lessons of like what not to do.
Mhm.
And those are almost just as valuable as the
Yeah.
ones that show you what to do. And my first television writing job was on The Ghost Whisperer, which was I guess sort of a little bit of a weird fit for me at the time. It was a brand new show at the time,
I
and
watched that show.
yeah,
It was a good show.
what I learned from that show is that a show itself can change fundamentally from pilot script to filmed pilot to series. Those can be three very different things.
Interesting.
So when I read the script, it felt like one thing. It felt sort of Buddhist. It felt very philosophical. It felt like a love story. And it was all those things. But then the pilot leaned hard into the procedural component.
Yeah.
Or no, the pilot didn't really. The pilots can't really do that. But off of the pilot, I think the network encouraged the writers to lean into a story of the week formation, which I hadn't come to the project expecting that. And it's not necessarily the kind of writing I like to do. I
Yeah.
can do it. And so that was an interesting sort of a maze to run through, trying to figure out how to adjust what I do to what they needed.
Mhm.
And I don't think I did a particularly good job. I was only on for one season, but I learned a lot. It was a valuable lesson to know that like there is so much work and change that can go into a project between the pilot stage and the series, and you have to be prepared for that.
Do you have a preference with everything that you've done with writing, with producing, with directing? Do you have a favorite? Do you have I want to write this, but I need to direct. I don't want to direct it. or is it just project by project? How involved?
Do you mean, do
Or
I have a favorite project?
no? Do you have a favorite part you play in the projects?
Oh, I was gonna say, like, if I say a favorite project, I've got a
No,
lot.
no,
We're
no.
not
We
gonna
would
put you in
no
that
favorite
position.
children.
No,
You
I like I
you
guess
love
I
all
do
your
like
children.
top 5. I like it's funny because show running is, I always say it's about 15% writing, which is funny because like I'm a writer, like that's my job and my title and my skill set. But so much of it is about producing and about, and it makes you a smart writer. It makes you a better writer. This is why I always advocate for writers to come to the set for their episodes. And that's been hard because most sets now are out of town. And you really have to lobby for that because no one is going to be super inclined to like fly the writer up to the set and
Yeah.
put them up and whatever
Right,
it is.
right.
So, but I think it's vitally important to be on the set and really see like, okay, you put this thing on the page. You want this scene to be in a hospital? Like, you should see how much work goes into creating that space, making
Right,
it look
right.
realistic. We're gonna get a location that is not, in fact, a hospital, and we're gonna bring in all this stuff to make it look like a hospital. And there are trucks lined down the driveway of this place, and there's police, and there's cones, and like it's an unbelievable undertaking. And you should know, like, if you're setting one scene in this hospital room, like, it better be worth it. And
Right.
so
Interesting.
that's like a good lesson to learn
Interesting.
along the path of your career, because it makes you a smarter writer because you always sort of have to be looking through a producing lens. Is this producible?
Interesting.
Like, is this
Interesting.
vital to the story? Could this be somewhere else? Like, and I'm not saying you should always like cheap out. Like, if it should be in a hospital, then put it in a
Right,
hospital.
right.
But
Yeah.
like, you should know what that means. And like, I love set design. I love props. A lot of people don't care about props. I mean, the props guys care about props. But like, there's always like a props meeting before every episode. And people are like, ugh, props. And I'm like, when's the props meeting? I can't wait for the props meeting. Because like you get to do stuff like pick, like which pen would this guy use to write down this thing from that he's a cop and he needs to write something down on a pad of paper. I'm like, well, it can't be this pen.
You would never
So
guess that.
interesting.
never
Like the
have this pen.
characterization through props is just such an interesting.
It is.
Like,
Well, in the building in Watchful Eye, I mean, it's a character.
That building.
Yeah.
So the exterior is a real building.
Okay.
In New York City. It's like on the Upper West Side, I want to say 116th, 123rd, somewhere way up. And it's a beautiful building, but it's unusual. It's on a corner, so the front of it is sort of curved, and it's got these beautiful archways in front. It's got a porte cochere, which is unusual. And but what we did was we filmed exteriors in New York. You know, every time you see someone walk into that building or walk out, that's real. But the lobby set itself was in Vancouver on a soundstage.
Okay. Okay.
Which is wild. So we had to recreate sort of what you would see of that exterior if you're inside. But then the lobby itself is in another country, which just blows my mind.
Now, were you part of that with your props and the set design and
God,
everything?
yes!
Oh,
Like,
that's amazing. Yeah.
It was so fun. Like I got to help pick out like what the floor was made out of.
Okay.
that's
And
so
that
cool.
doorknob they're talking about on
The
Reddit.
doorknob.
Well, it's bringing your writing to life. It's like
Yes.
that's so interesting and so much fun to build because you're literally taking from your imagination and bringing it to reality for the masses to see.
Right. And so when someone notices something, I'm like,
So
do I pick
writing,
that out?
taking like a novel to screen, I'm thinking what you said about as you're writing, be conscious of what it would make to produce this. So a screenwriter, that's very in their mindset, like because they're specifically writing. If you're writing a novel, you may not ever imagine that it's going to become a movie. And so they're very different starting places with the written piece, because if they wrote a novel, it can be as crazy as they, because they never were thinking it was going to be produced. But a screenplay, they're thinking, you're hoping they're thinking
absolutely,
about
yeah.
that a little bit.
If you're writing a screenplay, and it's interesting because when you're writing a screenplay, you actually are meant to be pretty spare in your description.
Yeah.
Because the production designer is the one who makes those choices.
Okay.
You only write about the curtains in a room if the curtains are relevant to the plot. Like I don't need, when I'm reading a screenplay, if we walked into a room and there was a green chair with a brass swivel base and a a yellow and gray rug. It's like, no.
I don't need
You
all
walk
that
into a
detail.
room and people talk. That's
Okay.
it. A screenplay is you don't have a lot of real estate on the
Yeah.
page to describe things that are superfluous.
Uh-huh.
You know, when you get to the stage of you're making this movie, you can sit down with the production designer and say, I would love to have a green chair with a brass swivel base and a gray and yellow rug. But like, if you put that into your screenplay, it gums up the read and it slows people down. Like, what they really want to know
Yeah.
is, where are you and what are you saying?
It
Interesting.
takes away from the story.
It takes away from the story, and it also presupposes that like you're making decisions and taking away the agency of someone else whose job it is to
Yeah.
pick
Create
out
that
the,
world.
you know, it's
Yeah.
like they know things that I don't know because I haven't been trained in that. I am not, in fact, a production designer, and I love working with the production designer, but I'm always going to defer to them if they say, no, we have to do something. We can't do brown velvet. It looks terrible on camera.
Right.
Yeah.
Then see you later, brown velvet,
Gotcha.
for instance.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually wanted to back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because one of the things I think going through this is just you have such a, breadth and depth of experience. How did you decide on this career path for yourself? How did you get into it?
Decide is a big word.
Or how did you fall into it?
I don't know if I did decide. I think, well, I moved out to Los Angeles with a job. I had been offered a job as an assistant working for a director, a feature director, and it took me a while to get oriented out here. I didn't. I moved here from New York. I'm from Philadelphia originally, and I didn't quite understand Los Angeles. I didn't really understand Hollywood. It's like a lot of intersecting gears, and it took me a while. I think it takes everyone a while to sort of figure out, like, okay, how does this all work?
Yeah.
Who are all these people? And at the time, I always joke about this, that it seemed like every top executive at every company was either named Mark or Tom, and I could not keep them straight for the life of me. And and at working as an assistant, a huge part of what you keep is the phone sheet.
Yeah.
And I would someone would say Mark something, and I would just write down Mark, and then just put a last name because there's so many. But then it turned out that Mark hadn't called at all. And then when you call them back, they're like, we didn't call you. And then that's embarrassing. I was a terrible, terrible assistant. Terrible. For that, in that first job. And then I had a couple of other jobs, and I ended up working for a literary agent. And that, by the time I got to him, I was a good assistant. And because I understood in which direction the merry-go-round was moving. And that was very interesting to me because a huge part of the job from his directive was read scripts, read everything that comes in that door. And he was a literary agent, represented feature writers and directors. And so I just started reading everything. And I thought, I would love to do this. And I got an idea for a screenplay. And I was sort of batting it around, and he and I had sat down to sort of talk about, like, my future. And he said, do you want to become an agent? And I said, I think I want to become a writer. I want to have an agent. And he said, well, can you write? And I said, maybe. And so he said, go take a class. And there's like all these classes you can take. I took a class called Writer's Boot Camp that was fantastic. It was a 6-week class. And I wrote a draft of a screenplay. And then I sat down with my boss again, and he said, how'd it go? And I said, I loved it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. The class required you to write for a certain number of hours per week, and you could spread it out however you wanted. And because I had this full-time job, and agency desks are pretty busy, I was mostly writing on the weekends. And I would sit down at 9 a.m, and I would look up, and like the sun was going down because I was so absorbed in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's never happened to me before. I think maybe this is the thing I want to do. And so he, quote unquote, fired me so that I could collect unemployment. He said, take 6 months, see where you get. You've met everybody in town. You know all these people. You've worked for me for 2 years. You know how this works. See where you get. and he kind of threw me in the swimming pool a little bit.
In the deep end.
Yeah. But it was the greatest favor anyone has really ever done for me, which is that he kind of kicked me out the door and said, look, if you're sitting down at 9 o'clock and looking up and the sun's going down, that's what you should be doing.
That's
Yeah,
love.
100%.
Yeah.
That's a passion.
And so that was I wrote this script called Blockhead that was about what happened to the Charlie Brown kids when they grew up. And I knew you couldn't sell it because you couldn't get the underlying rights to use the characters. And everyone said, don't write it if you can't sell it. And I was like, nah, I'm going to write it because I want to. And I did. And and it ended up becoming a calling card. Like people still, when I meet them, they're like, oh, you wrote Blockhead. And I mean, this was like 150 years ago. So it was a really fun script. It was sort of right at the very, very, very beginning of like sort of reboot fever. Like it
Okay.
was, remember like the first movie I remember coming out that was like capitalizing on nostalgia was the Brady Bunch movie,
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
which was like a parody,
Yeah.
but also great fun and everyone
Yeah.
loved it. And so I sort of this was about the same time, and the idea was just like, it's poking fun at something that we all love dearly, but at the same time it was treating it with great respect and honoring what it was and what it was to all of us. And it ended up becoming, I got every job that I've ever gotten has sprung from having written that screenplay that I used as a sample.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was kind of.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible.
You took a passion project and that's like your calling card, even,
Even now,
like,
I know. Someone found recently, someone must have scanned the cover page that had a note on it from someone who had read it that said something like, this is a pretty good script, but can she write anything else? It was just clearly like an internal note.
Yeah.
It
Right,
was something
right.
that was a little dismissive. And I was sort of like, oh, God, I don't know. Like, it's a good question. I hope so. But it was really funny to like unearth that.
Like to see that, like,
yeah, like to see
years
like someone
later.
else is being like, I don't know. Maybe this will work.
oh my gosh. So wait, go and also you said your top 5, like your 5 favorite kids.
Okay. I mean, I've only written on I don't know how many shows. Okay, I'll tell you just some that I loved.
Okay.
How about that? Not ranked.
Not ranked,
Not ranked.
like, but some that stick out in your head as like, and why?
Yes. I mean, Hindsight #1, which was because I created that show, which was a journey in and of itself. That was a script that I wrote for NBC in 2009, which NBC passed on the script. And then a year and a half later, VH1 was looking for scripts that were already developed because they wanted to get into original scripted content, but they didn't have they didn't yet have the apparatus at their network to develop things from scratch. So they were looking for things that they could sort of, pick up at mile 25 and, take to the end of the marathon. So they ended up we redeveloped it with them and then made the pilot and then got picked up to series and made 10 episodes. And that was a delight. That was about a woman who, on the eve of her second wedding, hits her head and conks out and wakes up on the morning of her first wedding.
Oh, that's
in
fun.
1995. And it had the best music and the best clothes. And it was sort of one of the reviewers said it was the intersection of romantic comedy and horror. Because going back to your old life is not what you think it's going to be. Because we all think that, right? We all think like, oh, if I could go back and change one thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But you can't change one thing. And also do you really want to change it?
Yeah. It's the ripple effects. We're all where we're meant to be at given
Right.
time.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
but this was this explored the temptation and the satisfaction and then the extreme dissatisfaction of doing that. And so that was so much fun. That was my first time really show running. I had a co-showrunner, my dear friend Johnny Norris, who also worked on Jane by Design.
Oh.
That's where we met. And we had such a blast. And we filmed in Atlanta. And that was just that's where I feel like I learned every valuable skill that I employ to this day. And I loved actors and I loved the sets and I just loved the whole thing. And then that had gotten picked up for a season 2 and we had written season 2, but then they canceled it before we started filming, which at the time felt like unspeakably tragic and unheard of. And now, of course, happens like once a week.
Right.
So that's horrifying, but also I'm kind of like, yeah, that's showbiz, right? I sound much more modulated about that than I feel. And then one of my other favorites was Daybreak, which I wrote on for Netflix, which was created by Aaron Eli Colite, who's another dear friend. We met on that show, and that was set in the apocalypse in Glendale, and only the teenagers had survived. So that was a very different kind of a young adult show. And that show was completely wild, like way outside of my comfort zone in every sense. But, Aaron really pushed us all to just go someplace real crazy. And it was crazy. The kids were like living at the mall and there were factions and it was a little bit based on warriors and not based on warriors, but inspired by, and I'd never heard of Warriors. And like Warriors has the best opening sequence of any movie in the history of time. But I didn't know that.
I have,
Warriors.
It's great.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But like, so that was just like, that was fun because it was such a left turn from anything I'd ever done before creatively. And that was filmed in Albuquerque, which it turns out is pretty easy to make it look like the apocalypse because we just like brought in a couple tumbleweeds. Sorry, Albuquerque. But like when you abandon everything and just put in some like kind of some gravel and stuff, it's like, whoa, this really does look. It got me sort of like hooked on apocalypse shows. So now like I watched all of Station 11 and I'm watching The Last of Us. And, now I'm kind of like, well, how did you guys do the apocalypse? Like we didn't do buildings falling down, but okay, I see what you're doing there.
Yeah.
And so that was a great creative stretch. That was really fun. And then they ordered a season 2 and we wrote it and then they canceled it. So, so that happened again. And of course, Zoe's was just such a delight, as we've said, because the timing was so perfect. And I just loved all the people on the show and loved getting to live in that world of finding songs that work for moments and finding moments that work for songs. And what's more fun than like,
I was gonna say that is a fun job.
Yeah.
it was
Like that is a very fun job.
It was a really fun job. And then this show was a wild ride. And filming during COVID is no joke. Like it is really hard. And you have to be really, really careful and you have to be really compliant. And there was a lot of testing and there was a lot of fancy footwork because if somebody did get COVID, like an actor, you had to write around that.
Right.
And with something that's really carefully constructed, like a mystery with a lot of different, you're playing this very careful game of chess and it's like one of your pieces is not available for 10 days.
Yeah.
And you're like, I need that piece back, but also can I sub in another piece? And that's going to change the trajectory of this whole story, but there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah. So that's like, that's producing. That's like when you were talking about like, what's the most fun yet most challenging part of the job is like in that moment when your line producer comes to you and says, okay, we're starting this episode tomorrow and this actor has COVID and they're not going to be available. Do we shut down or are we rewriting? And you say, we're rewriting.
Right.
Yeah.
And there were 2 other writers up on the set with me in Vancouver that week. And we sat down on the floor of the soundstage in like a circle as though around a campfire and passed this laptop around, fixing this script. And we were just in it. People kept coming over and being like, do you guys want chairs? And we're like, no. Like, we need to be
like,
on the
You're
floor.
on this.
This grimy, freezing cold concrete floor. And I was like, I just need to
do it.
I need to do it.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm in a chair, I'm not, this is too serious for
Mm-hmm.
chairs.
Mm-hmm.
This is floor work. And we just did it. We changed the story and got some actor who was on their way to the airport. We're like, can you turn around and come back and do this episode?
Oh my gosh.
Oh my god,
And
the
they did.
The
pivots,
energy
the
that
pivots.
I mean, in these pieces that you picked as your favorites, the energy is so high in all of those.
Yeah.
That's what, yeah,
It is.
I'm hearing from
But
you,
it's
like,
also
the
like
different and
yeah, and it's also like just sitting on like eggshells during
yeah.
COVID because you're just like, what's gonna happen next? And
Yeah.
like making sure you're thinking of like, well, are you constantly just sitting there with like anxiety, like what's gonna happen next?
I mean, COVID was one of many different things that I
Yeah.
was anxious about, or just paying attention to. And I think, it's also, you're always thinking about the budget. You're thinking about like
Yeah.
Mhm.
what is possible here. I want this to look expensive, but I don't want it to be expensive.
Yeah.
And that's not everybody's sort of first thought when they're writing a show. And I've sort of learned to make that my first thought because some of the shows that I've worked on have had very tight budgets. So I've sort of, I've learned a couple tricks. And, I've learned not to set scenes like on a boat, for instance.
That could be expensive.
I
Boats are always
mean,
expensive.
you can't, like, no boats.
Right.
Triangle of Sadness
Yeah,
can do a boat. I'm
right,
not doing a boat.
right.
It's, and yeah, it's exhausting, but at the same time, you get that sort of like, you get in a groove. It's like, you hear about people who are runners. I'm not one of them, but like where they're like, you get to that,
yeah.
you push past the painful part of it,
Mhm.
The
the
discomfort.
part that I don't push past, where I'm like, this is painful. I'm not going to do it. But where you get to that, you get
Yeah.
that high where you're like, oh, I'm just whacking moles here. I'm just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
just
You're just
bring
getting
me
it
a
done.
problem. I'm going to solve it. Bring me another problem. I'm going to solve it.
Yeah.
I can't solve this problem. Let's find someone who can, and that's a huge part of, I think, what made this show successful was just sort of keeping our wits about us.
Yeah.
And you have to have a sense of humor. You cannot, you have to like take the job very seriously, but at the same time, not take it seriously. And that's finding that balance is really hard. And getting other people to find that balance is hard, where people like start to freak out and you're like,
Mhm.
hey, this is a television show. We don't work in the ER.
Yeah.
Like
Right,
no one
right.
is, I don't think anyone's going to die.
Yeah.
I hope. But let's put this in perspective.
Right.
And
Yeah.
like
Keep it grounded.
let's find a solution. Every problem has a solution. And one of the best sort of like pieces of advice I got, or lengthy, like a scroll of advice, was at the Writers Guild has this program, the Showrunners Training Program, which I have not taken the whole, I think it's like 6 or 8 weeks or something. I did the crash course that's one day. And that's when they sort of, it's like listening to the greatest hits album. And Glenn Mazzara came in and talked about the difference between a problem and a crisis. And a crisis is anything that threatens to shut down production. Everything else is a problem. And every problem has a solution. And then he gave us like a list of 10 things to do in a crisis, which I have written down and printed out and framed and needle pointed and everything. But it's the most important. There's 2 that are really important. One is don't respond when you're hot, which is
That's
like,
fair. That's every
Yeah.
that's
it's
every
like
crisis
advice
in the
for
world.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other was ask your friends for help,
Oh, interesting.
which was, I mean, it's almost like one of those pieces of advice that goes without saying, but at the same time, you're like, oh yeah, I can ask my friends for help. And sometimes the help is just, can I vent to you about this? Person who is not involved with this at all.
Mhm.
And I mean, I have miles of texts with like Aaron Colite, who was not working on this show and has his own like crises and fires to put out on his own show. And I'd just be like, oh my God,
Listen to this one.
listen to this one.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, man, that sounds awful. And I was like, yeah. And then I felt better
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I had shared it. I had given somebody else some of the pain. It just actually sounds really cruel, but it was helpful. And it was really helpful too when I would like text a friend and be like, I'm losing it. And they'd be like, is there anything I can do to help? Like, do you need me to write this script for you? And I'd be like, well, no, but I really appreciate that you offered.
Yeah.
And because it can be very isolating,
Yeah.
where you're like, I guess this is just my problem now.
And it's not being alone.
Yeah, it's not being alone.
Yeah. You're not on a ship in the middle of, the water.
Getting
No.
back to boats.
Getting back to boats.
Not
Never
in the
boats.
triangle of
No
sadness.
boats.
Yeah.
Well, I think
No
there's
boats.
also this outside misconception that, a movie set is here's the perfect script and the director just sits there and goes like this and the actors know exactly what to do and everything's perfect and the producer writes a check and is like there's such and your leaders and your problem solvers and everybody's wearing so many hats. I think there's that outside view that this must be nirvana at all times.
Oh, it's
And it's not.
it's not. I mean, in some ways it is. It's really magical.
Right. And it's fun.
And it's
fun.
fun.
Yeah.
But like the idea that like the script is ever really done
Right.
is
Right.
hilarious to me. And there's times when actors feel like I don't understand this, or I don't get this, or I don't want to say this, or is there
Why am I doing this?
why am I doing this, and is there another, and I'm always really willing to like work with, if they feel like if something doesn't sound right to them, that's something I have to listen to because there's a reason.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, can we get it once as scripted and then you can riff?
Mhm.
Because you don't want to come back without the line on the page, because sometimes the network and studio are like, well, wait, where did that line go?
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, I didn't want to say it. But I always invite improv, and I sort of invite the actors' input in the moment if there's something they're
Mhm.
feeling or something they just want to kind of throw in there or try out. Like, I love that. Like we can,
Yeah.
and on this show we didn't have a lot of time to workshop. There was no rehearsal time. We didn't have time for table reads. It was really, we were under lots of guns.
Mhm.
And, but generally I think it's really fun to be able to like, be like, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
How would you like to, what sounds right to you?
Mhm.
Interesting.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it is not easy, but when it's all done and you've sort of like handed it in and you're finished, you're like, that was a piece of cake.
Like giving birth.
Hindsight's
Like, I'll do that
2020.
again.
I don't remember that.
Right. And I even left myself notes that was like, when the day comes when you're like, this was a piece of cake, no problem. Like, I'm just here to remind you.
Remember
It was
this.
It was not.
Do you ever find yourself having writer's block, and how do you get through it?
Writer's block is real. I will walk away and go read something.
Mm.
And or go like watch another show. Like you have to free your mind. I mean, real writer's block is a serious thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever experienced like real honest to God writer's block. But like I have been sort of like overpowered by like procrastination bugs. And like that's, the only thing that's going to be the antidote to that is a deadline.
Yeah.
And I take deadlines pretty seriously. I don't blow past them because it stresses me out too much. But I always say, like, if you're staring at the screen and nothing's coming out, like, you got to walk away from that screen.
Mm.
And you have to, people are like, ideas come to them when they're driving. Ideas come to them at the gym, I hear. I imagine that's what happens with John Legend at the gym, at my gym. Or you in the shower.
The shower.
The shower.
shower.
Best thinking.
And my theory is
Best
that like
thinking.
you're doing something else with your body,
Mhm.
and your brain is working on that, and that relaxes this really tense muscle
Mhm.
that is struggling so hard to find an idea.
Yeah.
The other problem is like it's like right before you fall asleep, and that's a disaster because you're like, oh, that's the best idea. I should write that down, but I can't lift my head or my arms, so I'm definitely going to remember this in the morning, and you never do. Or sometimes you write something down and then you see it in the morning and you're
You're
like,
like,
that
what is
doesn't make
this?
any sense.
That was
I
a
don't know
terrible
what that
idea.
is. But it is true that like you have to give yourself a little like grace and just walk away from the thing and say like, I don't have it right now.
Mhm.
And I might not even have it tomorrow, but at some point I'll have it. And also like you can call a friend.
Yeah.
Like on Millionaire where you're like, I'm stuck on this thing. And they might not have an idea, but even just talking about it
Yeah,
might
just
get you to an
brainstorming
idea.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned like kind of handing thing or the studio being involved with the evolution of your career. Have you seen a lot of changes from when back, like Ghost Whisperer, like was more true network, and then with all of the streaming services, all of the media conglomerates that are you seeing a difference in your work because of where, who's overseeing that or where it's going eventually?
Oh, yeah. And it's dramatically different, and the pace at which it changes is dramatic. Um, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, what was Hulu,
Right.
you know? And 5 or 6 years before that, Netflix was red envelopes that came in the mail and brought DVDs, and then
And
you
is it
kept them.
more freeing? Is it
It's more
easier?
free
Or is it just
creatively, it's a lot more freeing. There are
uh
definitely streamers, where I've worked where, like, anything goes, where you get almost no notes, where you can just sky's the limit. And, certainly, like, at Netflix, when they order a 10-episode series, they're just asking for 10 hours of television, and you can divide it up any way you want.
Oh,
So
interesting.
you can have a 20-minute episode,
Hmm.
and then you can have a 50-minute episode because they just needed to add up. I think this
Mm.
was the case the last time I worked there. Again, it could have changed. Now I could be speaking out of school, but like that was unbelievably freeing
Okay.
because with broadcast or even with basic cable, it has to come in at a very precise time. Like this, like Watchful Eye has to be exact
Right.
between
Yeah.
42, I think it's between 42:00 and 42:30. Like
Wow.
you have a 30-second
Window.
like window, and if it's 42:32, it is too long.
Wow.
And you have to like go shave out frames, and that's cool though. I mean editing is to me is magic. It's like you can do anything. But it has changed. It's changed creatively. It's changed the pilot cycle. Like it used to be that like you went into the broadcast networks and you sold a pilot idea in August or maybe July or maybe September. And once I sold something in November, but that was an outlier. And then you write it and you hand it in before Christmas. And then you do one rewrite after Christmas. And then they make decisions about which pilots they're going to
Mhm.
make. And then they make them in March. And then they decide what's going to go on the air in May. And then it all starts over again. And that's what used to be.
Mhm.
And that's still sort of the case at the big networks, kind of. Except for now, everything is totally year round. And you can go
Mhm.
anywhere. And it feels too like there are more outlets springing up all the time and becoming interesting and becoming Hulu and being like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
Mhm.
we have The Handmaid's Tale and we
Mhm.
have, all this cool stuff. And they devote the resources to it that it needs and they make it amazing. Um, and people will come. It's like if you build it, they will come. So it's, and it's interesting the way like the fortunes ebb and flow with the fortunes of these big
Yeah.
Yeah.
like corporate entities, let's call them, like Disney or NBC Universal. Like these are huge companies with
Right.
like stockholders, and so you're even on your own in your own little microcosm of your show, you're still thinking about the health of the company,
Mhm.
and you're still thinking about how am I contributing to strengthening this company's bottom line. And it's not enough to just be critically acclaimed, and it's not enough to
Yeah.
just have like decent ratings. It's you really have to distinguish yourself, and that's hard because like everyone thinks they're
Yeah.
making a good show,
Right.
but some of them sink and some of them swim.
Yeah. Well, I guess that leads me to my next question for you is one of the things that you had said and, had mentioned was just shows being canceled.
Yeah.
After a pilot or after a season, and obviously that pace has sped up based on how much content is now out there based on the streamers and all of the different avenues and channels. It's like, what would you tell young creatives right now to just stay inspired? Because, it's like this industry, it's like there's more opportunity to be shut down while there is enough opportunity to thrive
It
at this
is.
point, right?
I mean, the good news is that the appetite for content is bottomless.
Yeah.
Where everybody needs content. And we've always said it's like playing the lottery. It's like, oh, you bought one lottery ticket, you didn't win the lottery, but next season you'll have 2 lottery tickets,
Yeah.
and then 4, and then this is becoming math, which is outside of my purview. But it's just like the longer you stick with it, I think the real currency is original ideas.
Yeah.
I think more and more what we're seeing, and again, there is a downside to this, but new writers are coming in with original ideas, and because there is such an appetite for content, they're going they're vaulting over the what we knew as sort of the ascending ladder of seniority at a television show, where it used to be that you came in as a staff writer, or you came in as an assistant maybe, and then you got promoted to staff writer. And this is sort of an apprenticeship. You're
Yeah.
starting off at a show. You are probably, perhaps one of the younger people there, or one of the less experienced people there, and you get to watch. You get to see how the show gets made, and you don't have a ton of responsibility, but you're at the table.
Yeah.
And then you work your way up, and you get to where you are a co-EP or an EP on the show, and then maybe you'll have your own show. But by that time, you've worked on a show for 6 seasons and you know what you're doing. So that was the old model. That's like from the Pleistocene era. Now, what we're seeing more and more is like young writers they have an idea and they end up selling the idea, but then they're like, okay, how do you do this? How do you make TV into TV?
Mhm.
How does this script become a show? And then the way that they end up retrofitting it is they find a more senior writer like me or my peers who have been doing this a long time, and they say, can you supervise this writer and help them get their thing into shape and get this on the air? So, but that's, there's a limited resource of senior writers who are not working on their own thing or on a show already. So it's a little bit of I guess I would say that your original ideas are really valuable and are worth like working on and doing whatever you can to promote them. But sometimes the thing you're writing is something that could be a great sample, like my script Blockhead. Like you couldn't sell it, you couldn't make it. There was nothing I could do with it. All it was a writing sample. But it got me a bunch of jobs because people dug the script because it was fun and it was funny and they liked reading it. And so I think having a great sample is vitally important. I don't think people need to have 100 samples.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's, I'm almost like, the most important thing to me is meeting somebody. Like that's how when I'm putting together a staff, I'm like, are you a cool hang?
It's cultural. It's a cultural fit.
I mean, it's just like
you have to spend time with these people.
Yeah. Do you want to come hang out with me and do this thing? Like if you've gotten to me, if I've gotten your sample, then you can write.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there's so many gates between just someone with a script and, oh, I'm submitting this for staffing.
Mm-hmm.
But I always found it like when I was first starting out, I went to the movies every Friday by myself and would just see whatever was coming out, like during the day, like day movies.
Day movies are the best.
Day movies are the best.
I miss having time for day movies. Yeah,
very, very much. But that was like, I was young and carefree and
could make your own schedule.
And I go to the mall. But that inspired me. That was like and then because I was learning how to write a movie, I was there as a student.
Do you have a favorite movie?
Do I have a favorite movie?
Or I always say you have to have three favorite. You can't ever pick one.
Oh boy.
Do you have a?
Goodfellas is the movie that I think I reference the most often.
Okay, that's a great one.
Rosemary's Baby
Oh.
is the other movie that I referenced the most often and was very handy and referenced often in Watchful Eye because it's also a haunted apartment building in on the Upper West Side. And probably Rushmore.
Oh, so funny. Yeah. I was going to say, there has to be something lighter in there.
I was going to say, it's like, those are some heavy.
Well, the movies I liked the best as a kid are now the director who shall not be named and is canceled, so I feel like I would be not, I don't want to reference those as early favorites, but I think pre-cancellation, I was very influenced and inspired by Woody Allen. But that's listen,
That's smart humor. We can just call it that's a yeah, that's just
yeah,
there's
I
very much a
mean,
smart humor
and
and that
urbane and
yeah.
like, that I was I just found it really relatable, and like there were certain movies I saw as a little kid, probably too young,
Mhm.
that just made me feel grown up, because like if I could laugh at that joke, if
Right.
I got that joke, then maybe maybe I maybe that meant I would grow up to have a sense of humor. I
Right,
don't know.
right.
There was something aspirational about those types of movies. Um, I loved She's Gotta Have It. I loved, a lot of early like cool independent films, Sex Lies and Videotape. Um, early Cameron Crowe, like Say
Oh,
Anything, Singles.
Almost
I
Famous is one of my it was my top 3. That's just brilliant. Almost
love that
Famous. Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
And I also like horror. I like, it's my husband can't watch anything scary at all. He has to like leave the house if there are zombies on TV,
I'm not
and
a
That's
horror person.
yeah.
yeah,
But I think it was Paul that
I'm a
mentioned, like,
rom-com
horror
person.
and comedy, like, screaming then laughing is such a
Yeah.
natural emotion that they
yes,
really can, go together. A lot of comedy people known for comedy love horror and get inspiration from that, which I'm not a horror person either, never
Mhm.
kind of put them together, but it makes sense.
I wasn't a horror person, but feel like I've become a horror person, and maybe it's because like it feels so like dysregulated in life. It's like let me just watch something that's like incredibly horrible, and then it'll make me feel calm. Where I'm like, well, that was horrible, but now it's over,
Yeah, yeah.
and it
Oh,
wasn't real,
It wasn't
and
real.
came through it,
I
yeah.
don't live in the hereditary house, and that's that person's problem. But but yeah, and then some of my favorite. Someone asked me recently what my favorite TV shows were, and I was kind of went back to the vault, like early favorites, like Moonlighting and
Oh,
30
yeah.
Ugh.
something and Felicity, and
Oh, yes.
just really living in that world. And I loved original Beverly Hills 90210 and Melrose Place, like just those fun escapist
Yeah.
soaps.
Well,
And
they're meant to take you out of the reality, right? Like, that's the
yeah,
whole point, and I think that's probably why horror does it too, right? Because it's this is not reality, and that's the whole point of viewing, is you can go into your imagination and you can it's escapism in some ways.
yeah, and that's sort of yeah. I read this book a couple years ago. I listened to it on Audible, called *Sapiens*, that was about the history of Homo sapiens.
Uh-huh.
Fascinating, and it said that that's the thing that makes humans human, is that we can envision another world,
Mm.
that we
Mhm.
can tell stories,
Mhm.
and that is the sort of like that was the divide between sort of us and the rest of the animal kingdom, is the capacity to be able to envision um like a higher being, a god, or being able to come up with an alternate story to the one that you're in. And
Mhm.
that struck me, obviously, because I'm still talking about
Yeah.
it, um
It's really
it's really profound, because I think there is something amazing about the tradition of sharing stories, sharing mythologies, and it lives,
Yeah.
and it lives
right.
beyond even
Oh,
like
right.
Library of
Yeah.
Congress, that was my initial goal. It's like I just want to be in the Library of Congress somewhere.
It was something that lasts, yeah.
And
Yeah.
like there's a novelization of this movie I wrote, New York Minute, that has my name on it, and I'm like, there you go, Library of Congress, I'm in. I'm immortal now.
Done.
This is just like,
Forever.
but there is something about it that does feel like if you hit it right, then and you're telling a story that's meaningful, like it outlives you, and it's very reassuring.
That's an amazing goal and an accomplishment.
Yeah. So no big deal. Just make yourself immortal.
For all of us to strive for. Well, it's interesting what you said about the escapism that is going back to my film buyer days. There's data that supports films that were made to capture something in time right then, like when the war in Iran, or we just experienced it with She Said
Mhm.
this that it's too much. It's too in. We're living this every day. Why we would never go escape to see this where we need to go escape. It doesn't have to be fluffy. It can be horror. It can be this,
Yeah.
but something that's
So that people resonate.
not our current reality. And
Mhm.
those films, those projects, they just miss because we're watching it every day. Why would you want to go
Yeah.
to your happy good place of going to a movie theater, or your time with Netflix, whatever it is, and watch what you're living every day? You just don't want to.
Right. But that also speaks to how something becomes like almost like a file that you can come back to
Yeah, you can
later.
do it later. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wonder if people felt that way about All the President's Men, where they're
Right.
like, do
Yeah.
I have to go watch a movie about Watergate? Meanwhile, I love All the
Yeah,
President's
yeah.
Men.
Oh, yeah, you can
Now
go
we
back
look
to it
back on
later.
it
Such a
differently.
time
Absolutely.
Yeah.
capsule.
Yeah.
And like when we were trying to
Yeah.
explain Watergate to the kids, we're like,
Yeah.
we're going to watch All
Watch
the
All the
President's
President's
Men.
Men. Yeah.
They thought it was
Yeah, it's just that,
very dry.
when this timing. Timing is
But
everything, right?
yeah, but it's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
like, I was just encouraging a friend yesterday to watch broadcast news, but I
Oh,
laid all these caveats all over. I'm like, it is
Yeah.
really dated.
yeah,
It
Yeah.
is very dated. But at the time, it felt
right,
so current.
Yeah.
right.
And now it's like, oh my God, videotapes and like these giant, I mean, there's a giant video camera, but like it's, there are moments in that movie that at the time felt so current and now feel like it's like watching like Singing in the Rain. It's like really, it feels like an old movie, but it's like, but there is something universal in the message and something that does sort of persist and lives on in our imagination and becomes a historical document, really. But I think you're right. I think there is such a saturation right now of the 24-hour news cycle and the constant updates and the
Right,
minute
social
something
media,
happens.
everything.
Yeah.
It's like we're so inundated with day-to-day content. It's like how
Mhm.
many alerts do you get on the phone from whatever news source you pull from? You're up to date all the time.
Right.
And I think that escapism is something that is very well, I think it's well received now. I think people are looking for it, and when you're starting to look at some of the shows that have been hits over the past 2 years, there's reasons for it
Yeah, the
because they're
rom-com
not,
coming back,
um,
the mysteries coming back, the comedies coming back. I mean, even talking about what comedy looks like now and how important it is.
Oh my gosh, like
yeah.
Abbott Elementary and
Oh,
Ghosts are
yeah.
two of my new favorites that
Mhm.
I absolutely love. And it's interesting too, because having worked on 2 different shows during COVID, we talked a lot about like, do we acknowledge this in the reality of the show?
Mhm.
And there were some shows that did, like Shameless had a
Yeah.
whole season where it
Mhm.
was like they were wearing masks.
The morning show did too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it was like, there is a choice you make where you're like, we are going to acknowledge this. And in that moment watching Shameless, I was like, I remember thinking like, like, you guys are wearing masks?
Yeah.
Like,
Do I
we're
wanna
all
see
wearing
this?
masks.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
bummer. But like for anyone who's going to go back and watch that, again, it becomes a historical document. It places it in time. And the day will come when we all are, I hope, looking back and saying, oh my God, remember when?
Yeah.
But we chose in the world of the Watchful Eye to, create a world where either COVID was over or COVID had never happened, or, we didn't deal with it because I felt it was enough of a fairy tale and it removed enough from reality with the supernatural component and the, some aspects of it that were just sort of, I hope, timeless.
Mhm.
That I felt like we didn't necessarily need to anchor it in a particular year.
Yeah.
But everything's always anchored in a year because
Yeah.
are there iPhones
Right,
or
right.
are there
Is it
not iPhones?
Right, it's well obvious.
Well, it's funny because when we were talking before we started taping about like Gilmore Girls, like they're like you can see like the evolution of the iPhone,
Right,
or the
right.
phones,
The
through
flip
system being
phones
like
and the
Blackberries and like flip phones,
I
and
mean,
it's
the
crazy.
way my children howled at that phone in Wall Street,
Oh, yeah.
where Michael Douglas they're like,
Yeah.
what is that?
Yeah, that
And
huge
it was like
brick
that
he's
huge brick with an
uh,
antenna. And I was like,
uh
that was the height of technology. He
Oh,
was
it
like,
was
this
Oh,
was what
yeah.
the really rich guys had, was like a phone you could take to the beach.
Oh, yeah, in a bag.
Oh, I have
I
like so I
mean,
have I have a 10-year-old, and she got into like the Saved by the Bell, and the Zach Morris phone was
uh-huh.
like, she's like,
Oh.
"What is that?" I was like, "That's a cell
Wait, have you
phone."
tried to explain to your children what an answering machine is?
Mhm.
It's an hilarious conversation where they're like, "Well, what do you mean that they didn't know? How did they if they called?" "Well, you didn't." "Well what
What do
did
you
you
mean?
do?" "You called back." And then if you were fancy, you had an answer machine, and they were like, what is that? What do you mean?" It's just hilarious, the whole
Oh my
evolution of
god.
those.
Everything I try to explain, they look at me like,
Like, you're
what are you
yeah.
talking
"What are you
about?
talking
Oh,
about, mummy?"
Like, try
Yeah.
explaining to them like live television,
"Oh,
where you're like, oh yeah, the show was on at 8. And if you were not home at 8, you didn't see the show.
yes."
Well, that's like one of the core I watched this documentary around Gen X, and one of the cultural definitions, like, or the defining moments for the generation, is the fact that we were all around one television at 8
Mhm.
o'clock on a Friday. Like, you didn't have all of this content
Right, to choose
to
from.
choose from. That it's like our cultural references are at 8 o'clock on Friday. You sat down and it was the TGIF or
Mhm.
whatever that show it was, or what our parents watched, like Dallas.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody
Dallas.
think
Well,
about
I'm
that.
older than you guys, and I with Cindy Williams passing away, I mean, Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley were that.
Like,
When I
yeah.
was little, it was a Tuesday night, you watched Happy Days at 7 and Laverne and Shirley at 7:30, and again, it was that and everybody talked
Everybody,
about it the next day
that was the
because there
that was
was
the
and
bond.
nobody put anything on to compete with them because it was so popular.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I
Yeah.
imagine there was some kind of news hour on
Oh, yeah, maybe on the other channel or something,
for
but you
that
watched
Yeah.
one
it.
family that had 2 televisions.
Yeah, oh,
Like,
those
Get
fancy
it?
I
people.
don't know
Yeah,
about
we
those
But
did
when you
not
people.
order
talked
that.
about the
No.
cycle of pilots and I was like, "Does anyone know what a rerun is anymore? A repeat?"
Mm,
The summer you watch reruns because it was shows went from September to May, and then in the summer you watched reruns, and I remember being so excited for the new shows to start in September again.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that was just the
There was the one summer, I think it must have been summer of 1992, when Beverly Hills 90210 had new episodes
Oh
over the
my
summer
god.
that were set in the summer. The whole point was that, like,
Like the whole
kids were
beach
on
club?
the beach
The
club.
beach
the
club.
beach club, right, 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 right.
And I was living in New York City that summer and I forget where I was. I think I had a couple different jobs, but I didn't have a television. And so I had to make friends based on their television availability. Like, do your parents live in the city? Do they have a television? Can I come watch 90210
With you.
on the TV? And
That's
that was
so
the
funny.
basis of the friendship.
Well,
Oh
I
my gosh.
remember, like, even as a kid, when 90210 was out, I was on that border age of like what's appropriate, what wasn't. But my mom would open the newspaper and read the description, and I remember like
Oh,
the episode that
yeah.
Brenda could have been pregnant or whatnot. Like
Mhm.
my mom was like, "Oh, you're not
You're not
watching
watching
that."
that.
Like
Gosh,
she
I
read it
forgot about
every
that, the
week. The
TV
TV
the
guide in the back of
yeah,
the paper,
Mhm.
yeah.
and my mom religiously, and I was always like,
Ugh.
"Stupid paper," and like I'd like sneak away to a friend's house to be like, "Can I watch it over here?" Because
That
they didn't have
is
DVR back then.
No,
No,
Like
you
this
could
was
record
like
something on a VCR.
on a VCR, but like my
Yeah.
mother would find it. So it was like,
Yeah, no,
Yeah, and
you
you had to
were
be
out of
yeah.
luck.
I was completely SOL that day.
That's funny.
I was like, I was like, oh man,
Well,
I had to
well,
hear
you have
about it.
a huge project right now that we're so but before I know we're getting the wrap it
We're
up.
getting there. The
They get-
orchestra's
we're
gonna
getting-
play us off.
Yeah, yeah. But what's coming next? Could you talk about your projects? What do you
Oh, that I'm
I-
working on?
Yeah, that you're working on. That we
Well,
could-
we're the obviously Watchful Eye has just premiered.
Yeah,
we
yeah,
Don't,
so right in the
we don't
middle.
yet know about a season 2.
Okay.
I have lit various candles. And we'd all love to come back and tell more of this story. When
Yeah.
you get to the end of the season, I think you'll see that there's it is set up for more storytelling. That would be great fun. And I have a couple of other ideas that I'm working on in developing. And this experience on this show was fairly draining. I'll be the first to admit that. And it left me a little bit out of gas. So it took me a while to get back to a place where I felt like I could sort of be creative again.
Do you take breaks from after projects?
Normally I don't.
Okay.
And this time I kind of forced myself to, because I think it's, the last couple of years have taught us like, hey, like you've got to safeguard your own mental health
Mhm.
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
no one's going to do it for you. And, I'm pretty like, I don't know, type A and driven and all the things.
Yeah.
And I don't really like sitting around and not doing anything.
Right.
So I like volunteered a lot at my kids' schools. Like I did stuff, but it wasn't
Work.
that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do think it's important, as I sort of, get more experience under my belt and sort of am able to look back and say like, oh yeah, I should have taken a break there and I didn't. And I'm trying to like let ideas germinate a little bit more slowly than I have in the past because I feel like I was really just on a treadmill and, I think there's something to be said for really giving an idea a lot of thought and care. Like we've just started watching Poker Face, and Poker Face
yeah.
is beautifully constructed, and someone obviously gave that a lot of thought and care. And you can really see it, and I find that very inspiring. As you were saying, like, what do you do when you're blocked? It's like, go watch something else that's wonderful.
Yeah, what a
and feel like I don't know if I can do that, but like I could do something.
Yeah.
And it's very, I find that very replenishing. But yeah, so I'm in a little bit of I'm circling over the airport waiting for someone to either tell me to land or to go to Ontario. It's like this is the hard part of this business, which is it's sort of feast or famine.
Yeah.
Like either like 6 months ago, I was working harder than I've ever worked in my life and didn't have one moment to like so much as like, I don't know, get a haircut. It was like there was nothing. It was like I'm working or I'm passed out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you finish it and then you're like, okay, now we wait.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's like a hard pivot. And I think, I tell people often ask me, like, how do you do this? Like, how do you keep your wits about you in this business? Like, it's so hard. Like, these cancellations are hard.
Yeah.
And like putting someone, even just putting all this work into writing a pilot that someone just passes on. And they pass on it for a variety of reasons. And I've had to like train myself to understand, like, okay, they're passing on it because it's not what they want right this second. Not because it's bad.
Mhm.
Maybe it's bad, but it's like, it's just not their thing right now.
Yeah.
And, but it can be really crushing. It's like hard on your ego, especially if you're, basically an A student and you're used to people saying like, hey, you did a really good job on this. A/A minus, versus like, getting a pilot passed on feels like a big F.
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes a strong stomach, but I also think it takes perspective and having support from, friends and family, like mostly friends, family, sure. But, having a sense of, it sounds more negative than it is, but it's like misery loves company.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I have so many friends in the business who are doing exactly what I'm doing and who understand. And where
it's community, it's
it's
finding your kindred souls in the process that you can commiserate, you can celebrate, you can, you can grieve together, you can, can face all of that together, and that's something that is so irreplaceable.
It's huge.
Yeah,
and you also have to have some friends from outside the business where you're like, like lawyers and doctors and stuff,
like ground you.
Yeah, where you're like, oh my God, this stupid thing happened, and they're like, oh well, I also had a stupid thing happen, and you're like, well. That's your doctor. Okay.
It goes back to your perspective. Your perspective conversation of it's fun. We're doing fun things.
Well, Emily, it has been such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And we wish you so much luck. And we are cheering from the stands for you.
Thank you. And you can come on Reddit and like we can theorize and we can talk about like doorknobs and but yeah, it's so
like that is going on Reddit is so brave. I give you so many props.
Yeah, especially not anonymously.
I know. When the moment comes when someone comes for me on Reddit and is like, "Oh, you're a total sham and you're horrible and you're whatever," then I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to be on Reddit."
Then you're going to be like white blob.
White blob.
I'm nobody. But no, I mean, it is fun, and that's sort of like that's the internet is terrifying, but it's also like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
gives you this
So
like
much.
access. Like,
Yeah,
when would
the
you
good
ever
and the
be able
bad.
to like get people asking in real time, like, "Oh my God, is it the doorknob?" And you can be like, "No,
But good
but I
idea.
love that you thought that."
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like this feels like it makes me feel like I'm doing the thing, like connecting to an actual audience. It's really a treat.
Yeah,
That's
good. Well,
amazing.
thank you so much. It was so nice having you,
Thank you
and we
for
will
having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womeninentertainment.com.